Staff Sergeant Maria Santos bleeds from 7 bullet wounds as she carries her unconscious Navy SEAL teammate through enemy territory. 4 miles to safety point, 200 pounds on her shoulders. One promise that keeps her moving: no soldier gets left behind. Her legs shake, but her heart refuses to quit. Before watching full story, comment below from where you watching. Also like and subscribe for more stories. The dawn sun cast long shadows across the jagged peaks of the Hindu Kush Mountains as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle scope with practiced precision. At 28, she had already earned a reputation as one of the most reliable soldiers in her unit, her compact but powerful frame belying the strength that had carried her through 3 combat deployments. The bitter Afghan cold seeped through her tactical gloves as she surveyed the valley below, where a 6-man special operations team moved like phantoms through the rocky terrain. Navy SEAL Petty Officer First Class Jake "Phantom" Morrison led the team, his movements fluid despite the 80-pound pack strapped to his broad shoulders. Santos had trained with Morrison before. He was the kind of soldier who inspired confidence in others, the type who never left anyone behind. Now, as she tracked their movement through her scope, an uneasy feeling settled in her gut. The valley was too quiet, devoid of the birds and insects that should populate these mountains. "Alpha Team, I've got a bad feeling," Santos whispered into her radio. "No wildlife down there." Morrison's voice crackled back through her earpiece, acknowledging her concern but pressing forward with the mission. Intelligence had indicated a Taliban weapons cache in the compound ahead, but Santos could see fresh tire tracks in the dirt, too many vehicles for a simple storage site. Her warning came too late. As the words "it's a trap" left her lips, muzzle flashes erupted from every window of the compound. The sharp crack of AK-47 fire echoed off the canyon walls, and Santos watched in horror as her teammates dove for cover behind scattered rocks. Morrison and Corporal Jenkins were pinned down in the open, rounds chipping stone inches from their heads. Without hesitation, Santos abandoned her overwatch position and sprinted down the treacherous slope, rocks sliding beneath her boots as she laid down suppressing fire with her M4. A Taliban fighter emerged from a flanking position, and though Santos put 2 rounds center mass, his dying burst caught her in the left shoulder, spinning her around. She rolled behind cover, already feeling blood soak through her uniform, but adrenaline kept her moving. The firefight intensified with grenades exploding and showering the area with deadly shrapnel. Santos took a fragment in her thigh but continued moving, working her way toward Morrison's position. She watched him go down, a sniper's bullet catching him in the chest, another in the abdomen. His body armor stopped some of the impact, but blood pooled beneath him as he fell. Santos' army crawled to his position, bullets whining overhead, her shoulders screaming with each movement. Morrison's pulse was thready, his breathing shallow, and as she pressed hemostatic gauze into his wounds, more gunfire erupted around them. She felt the impacts, her right arm, her side, her leg. 7 rounds total had found their mark, but adrenaline and determination kept her functioning. Her radio crackled with static when she called for immediate evacuation. Either the device had been damaged by gunfire or they were too deep in the canyon for signal. The enemy fire suddenly stopped, and Santos could hear voices in Pashto getting closer as the fighters moved in to finish off survivors. Morrison's voice was barely audible as he whispered for her to leave him and get out. "Negative," Santos replied firmly. "We don't leave people behind." Looking around desperately, she realized the other team members were down. Some motionless, others missing. It was just her and Morrison, and she faced an impossible choice that wasn't really a choice at all. 4 miles to the extraction point through hostile territory. Morrison weighed 200 pounds in full gear. She was bleeding from 7 wounds and fighting shock. Her rational mind screamed that it was impossible, but her warrior heart had already made the decision. Santos stripped off Morrison's heavy pack and most of his gear, keeping only his weapon and medical supplies. She fashioned a quick tourniquet for his leg wound and administered morphine, then looked him in the eyes. "Jake, I'm gonna carry you out of here, but I need you to help however you can." The memory of Fort Bragg flooded back, 2 years ago when Morrison had been her instructor in combat casualty care. He'd made them carry 180-pound dummies for miles, always saying, "Your buddy's life depends on your legs and your heart. Don't let either one quit." Now those words would be put to the ultimate test. Getting Morrison into a fireman's carry, Santos felt his dead weight settle across her shoulders as pain exploded through her wounded shoulder. But she forced herself upright, hearing the enemy voices getting closer. Step by agonizing step, she began what would become the longest journey of her life. Through the maze of rocks and boulders, Santos carried Morrison while blood soaked through her uniform from 7 different wounds. Her legs shook with each step, his weight threatening to crush her, but she maintained a steady rhythm. Left, right, she whispered to herself, remembering her drill sergeant's words. When your body quits, your mind takes over. When your mind quits, your heart takes over. When your heart quits, you're dead. Her heart wasn't quitting. Morrison drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes mumbling incoherently, and Santos talked to him constantly to keep them both focused. She reminded him of better times, of promises made, of the beer he still owed her from that bar in Coronado. Her voice became his lifeline, just as his presence had become hers during those dark training days when she'd wondered if she was strong enough for this life. 2 miles into their journey, her legs finally gave out. Santos crashed to her knees, Morrison tumbling beside her as blood loss and exhaustion threatened to shut down her system. Her vision tunneled, darkness creeping in at the edges, and for a moment she wondered if this was how it would end, 2 soldiers bleeding out in the Afghan mountains, so close to safety yet so far away. But as consciousness threatened to slip away, Santos heard Morrison's voice, weak but clear, "Don't you dare quit on me, Santos. Not when we're this close." His words cut through the fog of pain and exhaustion, reminding her why she'd chosen this path, why she'd sworn the oath to leave no one behind. With tremendous effort she pulled herself back from the brink. Her medical training kicked in as she assessed both their conditions. Morrison had lost significant blood, but his vitals were stabilizing thanks to the tourniquet and pressure dressings. Her own wounds were serious but not immediately life-threatening if she could control the bleeding. Using her remaining field dressings, she created pressure bandages for the worst of her injuries, knowing that every minute counted. The sound of distant helicopters broke the mountain silence. Search and rescue was looking for them, but they were still too far from the extraction point to signal effectively. Santos knew she had to keep moving, had to get them to higher ground where they could be spotted. Summoning strength she didn't know she possessed, Santos hoisted Morrison back onto her shoulders. The pain was excruciating, but she focused on putting one foot in front of the other. Each step became a victory, each breath a defiance of death itself. She thought of her family back home, of her fellow soldiers who depended on her, of the code that bound them all together. The terrain grew more treacherous as they climbed toward the extraction point. Loose rocks threatened to send them both tumbling into the abyss below, and Santos had to feel her way forward as darkness began to fall. Her strength was nearly gone, her body running on fumes and determination alone, but she refused to stop. As they crested a ridge, Santos saw the most beautiful sight of her life, the lights of a forward operating base in the distance. They were less than a mile from safety, but it might as well have been 100. Her legs trembled with each step, and she knew she was reaching the absolute limit of human endurance. Morrison stirred on her shoulders, his voice barely audible. "Santos, I can see the base. We're almost there." His words gave her the final push she needed. Drawing on reserves of strength she didn't know existed, Santos forced her battered body forward, step by agonizing step. The sound of approaching vehicles reached their ears as a patrol spotted them on the ridge. Medics rushed forward as Santos finally collapsed, Morrison rolling safely onto the stretcher beside her. As darkness claimed her consciousness, she heard the most important words of her military career: "Both soldiers are alive. Mission accomplished." In the medical tent, as doctors worked to save their lives, Santos drifted in and out of consciousness. She heard fragments of conversations. Doctors amazed at their survival, commanding officers discussing her actions, fellow soldiers speaking in hushed, reverent tones. The word hero was mentioned more than once, but Santos knew better. She hadn't been a hero, she'd simply been a soldier doing what soldiers do. Days later, as she recovered in a military hospital in Germany, Santos learned the full impact of her actions. Morrison would make a full recovery, thanks to her quick medical intervention and the grueling journey that had gotten him to definitive care in time. The other team members had also survived, rescued by the same search and rescue operation that had found her and Morrison. The Medal of Honor ceremony felt surreal to Santos. As she stood before the assembled crowd, still weak from her injuries but dressed in her finest uniform, she thought about the code that had driven her that night. It wasn't about heroism or recognition. It was about the fundamental promise that binds all soldiers together. No one gets left behind. In her acceptance speech, Santos spoke not of her own actions but of the team that had trained her, the instructors who had prepared her, and the warrior ethos that had sustained her through the darkest hours. She dedicated the medal to Morrison and all the soldiers who had shaped her into the person capable of that impossible journey. Morrison, fully recovered and back on active duty, was in the front row. Their eyes met across the ceremony, and in that moment no words were needed. They had been tested in the crucible of combat and had emerged not just as survivors, but as living embodiments of the warrior's creed. The aftermath of that night changed how others saw Santos, but more importantly, it changed how she saw herself. She had always been a good soldier, but now she understood that true strength comes not from the absence of fear, but from acting in spite of it. She had carried more than Morrison's physical weight that night. She had carried the hopes and trust of every soldier who had ever depended on another. Years later, as Staff Sergeant Santos trained new recruits, she would tell them Morrison's words, "Your buddy's life depends on your legs and your heart. Don't let either one quit." But she would add her own lesson learned in the mountains of Afghanistan. Sometimes the most important mission isn't the one you're given, it's the one you choose for yourself. The bond forged between Santos and Morrison that night transcended the typical camaraderie of soldiers. They had looked death in the face together and refused to blink. In saving his life, Santos had also saved her own soul, proving to herself and the world that the values she had sworn to uphold were more than words. They were the very essence of what it means to serve. The scars from 7 bullet wounds would fade with time, but the knowledge that she had been tested in the ultimate crucible and had not been found wanting would stay with Santos forever. In a world where the line between life and death can be measured in heartbeats and the weight of one person carrying another, she had proven that sometimes the impossible is just another word for necessary. As she looked back on that night, Santos realized that she hadn't just carried Morrison to safety. She had carried forward the legacy of every soldier who had ever made the same choice, who had ever looked at a fallen comrade and said, "Not on my watch." In the Brotherhood of Arms, where trust is earned in blood and bonds are forged in fire, she had written her name in the honor roll of those who understand that true strength is measured not by what you can lift, but by what you refuse to leave behind.